So yeah, she she's still resting, and that's fine, because we're now going to talk a bit. And as far as I'm concerned, she deserves to have a nice rest, relaxing rest right now. And you know why? Because I really want to reiterate this point. She just found out that she, and this wasn't made very clear. I did go tell you what has transpired since that intro, which took place in Warcraft 3, but I want to give a numerical value to that, just to really help emphasize this point. She was just told that she has been a mindless, feral animal for the past 8 years. I want to reemphasize, re-say that again. 8 years. Now, some have asked, how much do our characters here actually remember from those past 8 years? They've never said. And I think that the intent was they wanted us to decide that from a role-playing standpoint. If you want to say, like, your character at times has, like, flashes of what they may have done during that time, the people they killed, whatever, you can do that. I think the one I'm okay with for my Worgen characters is that they don't remember anything. And the way this is for them is that it's basically like they've been in a coma the past 8 years. How many of you out there have played Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain? I hope it's quite a few of you, because it's a great game. In fact, I love all the Metal Gear Solid games, but that's just me. And this is not a spoiler, because it's part of the promotional material that they used. It was in the trailer that they used to help promote and announce the game. But in the beginning of Phantom Pain, you wake up in a hospital bed, and the doctor tells you you've been in a coma for the past 9 years. And our character just starts to, starts to panic and go nuts, because how would you react? Think about that for a second. Imagine something happened to you, and you ended up in some kind of coma, or whatever. And you by the time you come to and you recover who you are, you're told this many years have passed. How would you react to that? That's a traumatic experience for a lot of people to be told, yes, or almost a decade of your life has gone by while you were asleep. That's not easy for some people to handle, being told that. I don't know how I would react if that if that kind of thing ever happened to me. To be told, yeah, this limited amount of time you have to live, that's called life. Yeah, you just lost a chunk of it sleeping. Yeah. I don't know how I would handle that. So, as far as I'm concerned, our Worgen here deserves to have some time to rest and nap and just try to recover herself. In the meantime, I thought it would be fun just to kind of, elaborate a bit more, since that's kind of what I've been doing in this series, is trying to elaborate more so on the race and the history and such. And the history of Gilneas and the Worgen curse are a couple of interesting subjects to talk about. And I've done my research since the last video, so as she continues to lay there and sleep, which I really like the sleep animation here. Oh gosh. What's this guy gonna do? Is he also gonna sleep? Or is he gonna get weird? No, never mind. Okay. You never know. You never know what other players are gonna do when they show up and they see you sleeping. I'd like to think some people are still cool and okay with the idea that some players like to do this kind of role-playing thing. I just think this is a really cute little sleeping animation that she has. And how many of you sleep like that, where you're not sleeping, like you got your arm over your pillow and you're like, oh gosh. Yeah, I can attest to that. Anyways, the history of Gilneas. Well, that actually goes all the way back to the days when we had these beings known as the Watchers. How many of you are familiar with beings such as Odin, or Freya, or Hodir, or Thorim, or Mimiron? Or Loken, or Raden, Yeah. There's another one. His name is Tyr. And he was awesome. You probably learned quite a bit about him if you play a paladin in Legion, since a couple of your weapons have to come from Tyr, have a history with Tyr. In fact, Tirisfal, not too far from here, is actually named after Tyr. But anyways, Tyr actually helped carry forth a number of these very strange-looking, abnormal-looking Vrykul children, which is what we learned in Wrath, is that humans are actually Vrykul, that were like deformities. Like they're like very abnormal kind of birth defected Vrykul. That's what humans are. And he brought a bunch of them down to the kingdom at the time that was known as Erethdor. You can, it's based, it's known as the Wrathy Islands today, but what was Erethdor back then? Of course, the geography on the map here is not what it was back in those days. This is like way long, long ago. And they, at the time were, able to kind of become kind of a tribal kingdom and such. Fast forward a bit to after the First Sundering, when the trolls ran the world. Like the trolls and the various different troll tribes ran things. But also so did, the High Elves were also around at the time. And then we had this incident called the Troll Wars. Very important time. Where, and this kind of has to do with what's going on up here. So, during the Troll Wars, the tribe known as the Amani were basically telling the High Elves, we are sick of you kind of, just in general. Like, we're sick of you, so we're going to try and get rid of you. And so what the High Elves did, because by this point in time, those humans had actually kind of grown themselves, not necessarily into a super powerful force, but militarily, they were pretty decent. But they were still lacking some things. However, at this point in time, the High Elves were very proficient and knowledgeable when it came to magic, arcane and such. So, the High Elves went to the humans because they were seeking aid in their war against the trolls, because, yeah. So they said, all right, so here's what we're going to do. Here's the deal we want to offer you. We will teach a handful, like maybe 100 or so, of your people magic, because remember, magic can be taught in this setting. We will teach them magic if you help us win the war against the trolls. And they made that deal, and they ended up beating the trolls, the Amani trolls, in that war, and they have never recovered since. That's part of what Zul'jin was referring to in the trailer for the Zul'Aman raid back in Burning Crusade. Giving magic to the humans basically skyrocketed their progress as a people and as a culture. This eventually led to the foundation of Dalaran. Erethdor was the first major kingdom with magic users for humans. Dalaran was the second. Gilneas was the third. And yeah. In fact, just to refresh my memory, because that portion was off the top of my head, but just to make sure I remind myself of some of certain things, I've actually once again looked up some of the info online, and said, following their victory in their war against the trolls, the Empire of Erethdor entered into a period of prosperity and growth. After the death of King Thoradin, the empire began to expand, founding new city-states in the wilderness, including Gilneas. Each city grew and prospered. Gilneas and Alterac developed strong armies which explored the world. Over time, the power of Gilneas and the other city-states grew as that of Stormwind, as in Stormwind. Eventually, they developed their own customs and beliefs, and the empire splintered into independent kingdoms. Under the rule of King Archibald, the nation thrived, evolving into a formidable middle power capable of rivaling even Kultiris or Stromgarde. By the start of the Second War, Gilneas had become recognized as a significant entity in the political landscape of Lordaeron. It's also worth noting that Gilneas was founded by a group of people that had a lot of pride. How many of you have noticed that Gilneans tend to be very prideful people? The kind who think that anything from Gilneas is the best. Gilnean wine is the best. Gilnean crops are the best. Gilnean buildings are the best. That kind of thing. A little pompous, a little proud in that regard. It's one of the reasons why I've never been too fond of the Gilnean people in that regards. Emboldened by this fact, the kingdom's ruler, Gan Greymane, was not a strong supporter of the alliance, believing that his own armies would be more than enough to deal with any threat. That's why he's like, we don't need the alliance, we are Gilneas, we can handle anything. However, wanting to ensure trade relations with the other kingdoms, Gen sent a token force to assist the alliance. A token force. Let's also, this is by the start of Warcraft 2. This is when they weren't necessarily thinking that the demonic horde, the orcs, were that serious of a threat. Why should we bother help fighting your battles and your wars? Not understanding how, large of a threat this actually was. Remember, the demonic horde were here on orders of the Burning Legion. It was a ploy, a tool being used by the Burning Legion to make what we saw in Warcraft 3 happen, and then they just resorted to using the Scourge. But the point was that the demonic orc horde was here on behalf of the Burning Legion. That was the threat we were dealing with, and Gilneas was like, whatever. Now, it's also worth noting some of the High Elves also thought the same thing, but yeah, they sent a small little token force to assist the Alliance against the horde, because they didn't really think it was that threat that they need to send out anymore. Also, because that force was taken down, they held it against the Alliance. How dare you let our token force get killed? Yeah. Shortly after the Horde was defeated, Greymane pulled his nation's support from the Alliance, refusing to spend his nation's resources on keeping the orcs alive in internment camps or in rebuilding other nations that were devastated by the war. Why should we keep them alive? Why should we help you rebuild other places that were destroyed? Gilneas, along with Stromgarde, in fact, led the outcry over the decision to not execute their defeated enemies. And then we fast forward to the Third War and the Greymane Wall. Let's talk about this wall. Sometime after the Second War, Greymane constructed the Greymane Wall, which, let me remind you, is this right here. You probably saw it when we were going through Silverpine as our Forsaken. Remember that? Yeah, that's that wall over there. An enormous stone barrier that now separates Gilneas from Lordaeron, attempting to forever remove his nation from what he considered other people's troubles. Yeah, this was Greymane's thinking. We don't need to bother ourselves with other people's issues or troubles. We are Gilneas. We are the only one that matters. Can you see why I've never liked Greymane? Yeah, some king, some leader. He barricaded the majority of Gilneas behind the wall. No one, not even other humans, were allowed to enter Gilneas. It's also worth noting that there were Gilneas citizens out here. I'm pointing that out because of what's going to be coming up next. I want to reemphasize this. Here's the wall. This territory here was part of Gilneas, and Gilneas citizens were living out in this area. I want you to keep that in mind. The lands of Lord Darius Crowley, including Pyrewood and Ambermill, were notably separated from the Legion nation by the wall, effectively coded to Lordaeron. The Greymane Wall even remained closed to human refugees, begging to be allowed in during and after the Scourge's invasion of Lordaeron. That's why I want you to keep that in mind. He left and abandoned all those people outside the wall to the Scourge when they arrived. The status of Gilneas became unclear to the outside world. At the peak of their strength, the Scourge relentlessly assaulted the Greymane Wall and threatened to devour all of Gilneas. King Greymane's armies held the wall for days against a massive sea of undead heroes, but for every dead that fell, another took its place. Because it's the Scourge. In a desperate attempt to hold the seemingly unstoppable Scourge at bay, Greymane ordered his court archmage Arugal to unleash a secret weapon against the Scourge, the Worgen, who had been contained for millennia in the Emerald Dream. Unfortunately, after attacking the Scourge, the Worgen turned on the Gilnean soldiers, infecting them with their curse, and began attacking other humans living in Silverpine. Before long, the affliction had advanced through the legendary barrier and was gradually eating away at Gilneas' humanity. As reports of strange attacks and disappearances rose, fear took root in the hearts of Gen's people. Gilneas was shielded from the rest of the world by the Greymane Wall, by land and by its high cliffs and treacherous reefs by sea. Refugees and other nations long entreated Gilneas for aid, but these unfortunates never so much as saw Gilnean. Many became easy prey for the Worgen that occasionally strayed south from Shadowfang Keep. For many years, King Greymane forbade any attempt to leave the self-isolated, and all ports were closed, leaving sailors and people of other nations stranded in Gilneas, such as Tobias Mistmantle and the pirates of the Brash Tide crew. Gilneans were themselves locked out of their homeland were a rare sight, but not unknown, such as Baron Longshore, captain of the pirate ship Heedless. While Greymane's efforts to stem the tide of the scourge kept Gilneas from the grasp of the undead, the Greymane Wall inadvertently subjected the Gilneans to a dark fate all the same. Many fell under the Worgen curse, as it did with their neighbors to the north and Silverpine before them. A small group of soldiers known as the Gilneas Brigade joined the human expedition led by Jaina Proudmoore during the Third War, but those were actually sent by Lord Crowley as an act of defiance against Gen. And then we move to the Northgate Rebellion's Civil War, which has to do basically with this area up here. Although once a close friend of Gen Greymane, his staunch isolationism led Lord Darius Crowley to eventually take up arms against his king. This is what leads to the rebellion that you saw they were talking about in the previous portion we did. Leading his armed supporters into Gilneas City in an attempt to depose King Greymane, a bloody civil war erupted between the two factions, pitting Gilnean against Gilnean, brother against sister. The so-called Northgate Rebellion officially ended when Crowley and his leading allies were captured by Greymane's forces. Although rebels and their sympathizers continued to hoard weapons and supplies around Gilneas, political divisions had led to a deep and bitter hatred between rebels and royals, something that has only just begun to heal, with the Gilneans' focus shifting to their common enemies. And then it transfers to the history that we deal with in WoW. But now let's talk a bit more about the Worgen, because you're probably wondering, where did the Worgen thing come from? Well, the origin of the Worgen. Long ago, amid a brutal war between the Night Elves and the demonic Satyrs in Kalimdor, this is part of the reason why it's relevant that we did the Night Elf one already, a group of druids practiced a powerful yet unwieldy form that embodied the fury of the wolf ancient, Goldrin. If you want to actually see him, I actually did a video on the armor for the heritage of the heritage armor for the Worgen, where we actually got to meet him. Taught by Ralar Fangfire, these druids of the pack sought to temper the uncontrollable rage inherent in their chosen form. To do so, they willingly submitted to the energies of the Scythe of Elune. Yeah. The artifact that we actually get in Legion as a balanced druid. So you can see the deep connection in history between the Scythe of Elune and the Worgen. A mystical artifact that was created from Goldrin's Fang and the Staff of Elune. Rather than abate the druid's fury, however, the weapon transformed Ralar and his followers into Worgen, bestial humanoids enslaved by their own primal instincts, blinded by all-consuming rage. Ralar's druids tore through friend and foe alike during battle with the satyrs. Night elves wounded by the unruly beast contracted a virulent curse that turned them into Worgen as well. Desperate to stanch the affliction spread, Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage mournfully banished the Worgen beneath Duralnir within the Emerald Dream, where they would be in a peaceful slumber for all of eternity. And then here's where them getting recruited by Greymane starts to come into play. Over the years, the Scythe of Elune was hidden in Ashenvale, and the Druids of the Scythe, the original Worgen, were forgotten. The only proof that remained was a journal written by Fandral Staghelm. This is why the Scythe of Elune has actually been known since vanilla. Before their release, wolfmen were known in human folklore as Worgen. They were known in only the timid whispers of the old, or the fanciful embellishments of the old, and a farmer's child was likely to hear myths of beastly wolfmen stalking the fields and marshes outside the village. In his studies, the it's spelled U-R, that's all it's spelled, saw the Worgen in a home world he described as a dark place of nightmare. And although he wished to prove Worgen were real, he warned that they should not be summoned. While many remained in the resting state, some Kaldorei Worgen awoke and traveled the dream some time after their banishment, while others practiced shadow magic some time before their release. 18 years after the Dark Portal, the undead scourge arrived at the Greymane Wall outside Gilneas. Gilneas had constructed the wall to separate from the Alliance of Lordaeron, and to protect the city from the oncoming scourge. When the undead arrived at the wall, however, it became clear that it would not hold back the dead forever. Archmage Arugal told Gren of his findings about bestial creatures imbued with preternatural strength and ferocity. He sensed that they were in some sort of resting state and wished to be freed, and suggested that he could do so with Gen's blessing. The king agreed on the condition that Arugal summon one first to be inspected. He did so, and with Gen's permission, summoned more, including Alpha Prime, and put them against the scourge outside the wall. There's actually a comic that kind of goes over this story called Curse of the Worgen, so feel free to look that up and read that comic. As the battle between the Gilneans and the Scourge raged outside the wall, Arugal performed his summoning. He opened a rift connecting the physical world with the Emerald Dream. It doesn't say if Malfurion knew about this, and I have a feeling if Malfurion had been asked about this, he would have said, "No! Never!" Drawing the Worgen into Silverpine Forest, the Wolfmen wasted no time in turning their fury on the Scourge. They tore through the undead in a storm of fang and claw, and the creatures were even more powerful than Arugal had expected. At first, this plan worked, and the Scourge were forced to fall back. However, it is worth noting, the Scourge didn't exactly retreat. See, they think they retreated, but the reality was that the Scourge were simply leaving to go north to quell the loss. But because the Scourge left, they thought, "We did it! We held them back! Yeah! We are Gilneas! We are amazing! Because we beat the Scourge! Yeah!" Alpha Prime and the summoned Worgen turned on the Gilnean soldiers as well. After the retreat of the Scourge, Arugal betrayed his nation and swore loyalty to Alpha Prime and developed a loyalty to the Worgen. Gilnean soldiers bitten by the Worgen were taken inside the wall, and when they became Worgen themselves, were hunted and killed. Hold on. I'm surprised it took me that long for it to have me go AFK. Led by Alpha Prime and aided by Arugal, the Worgen of Silverpine sieged the keep of the noble Baron Silverlane. Situated above the tiny hamlet of Pyrewood, the keep quickly fell into shadow and ruin. Now known as Shadowfang Keep, there, Alpha Prime and Arugal... It says Arugal. I think it meant to say Archmage Arugal. I think that's a typo. Created the Wolf Cult to search for the missing scythe of Elune. The Wolf Cult recruited humans willing to become Worgen. The curse rapidly spread among the human population, transforming ordinary men and human into ravenous, feral creatures immune to undeath. So I should point out, though, that's not entirely true. So remember how when we went through Silverpine as our Forsaken, that they were like, "Oh, well, the Worgen curse prevents Sylvanas from bringing me back as Forsaken." Yes, it prevents Sylvanas from bringing you back as undead. That doesn't stop the Lich King, though. Remember, we can make Worgen Death Knights, because the Lich King is that strong that he can bypass the Worgen curse and bring a Worgen back as an undead. Because he's the Lich King, and he can do that. I just want to re-emphasize that point. Arugal also used his magic to curse the village people of Pyrewood to turn into Worgen whenever the sun went down. Those that followed Alpha Prime would become the Blood Fang Pack. That's where the Bloodfang come into play, and that's who those were that we met in Silverpine. Those that served Rugal became the Shadowfang Pack, and those cursed to appear as Worgen only at night became the Moonrage Pack. And then there is some more here on Valende and Terrorwolf about the Journal of Staghelm. Prayed once again to Elune and was granted the Scythe of Elune. She prayed to Elune and was granted, this is Valende's Star Song, by the way. And was granted the Scythe of Elune, which had been the tool for the creation of the original Worgen, and which could also summon Worgen. Valende received a vision after touching the scythe in which the Worgen battled an unflinching enemy, Lords of the Emerald Flame, in a vicious war. In reality, the Lords were the Satyr that had fought against the Night Elves and Worgen in the War of the Satyr. Using the Scythe of Elune, Valende was able to summon 30 Worgen to fight at her side against the demons. Later, Valende began to notice that some of her force were unaccounted for. It was as though the Scythe of Elune no longer required her presence to perform the summoning process. Perplexed by this development, she ordered the remaining Worgen to remain at the shrine of Melthandris in Ashenvale, and began to search for Archmage Rugal, whom she had heard also summoned Worgen. From that point on, her fate became a mystery to her comrades. But it was rumored that she was killed in Duskwood and lost the Scythe of Elune. The Terrorwolf Worgen stayed at the shrine in Ashenvale for a while and eventually left. And it actually has a picture of a member of the Nightbane pack in Duskwood. So if you wondered about the Worgen in Duskwood, even going back to the days of Vanilla, that's why. Remember, we find the Scythe of Elune in Karazhan in Legion. Just noting that. Okay. And that is pretty much the origin and story of Gilneas and the Worgen Curse. So I just realized I spent an entire video's length just going over this. So we're basically just going to go ahead and... You can consider this video just me going over the history of Gilneas and the Worgen Curse. And we will cut it off here, and we will actually continue the gameplay of this starting zone when we come back. Stay tuned.